The smell of Grandma's cake hung in the air, an aroma that meant comfort to most, but to 8-year-old Leo, it was just another sound in the chaotic symphony of Sunday lunch. He sat on the living room floor, far from the noisy table, focused. For weeks, he had been working on his gift for her. Using hundreds of matchsticks, he had built a perfect replica of the little chapel she used to attend as a child, a story she had told him once. Each stick glued with surgical precision, each window a tiny square of perfection. With hands trembling with anticipation, he stood up and walked over to his grandmother, Marta, holding out his little work of art. "For you, Grandma." Silence fell over the table. Marta looked at the chapel made of toothpicks, then at her grandson's anxious face, and her expression closed like a vault door. "I don't want this," she said, her voice cold as ice. "I don't know what to do with these oddities. I don't know what to do with it." And with a gesture of disgust, she pushed the gift away, and it fell to the tiled floor and shattered into hundreds of pieces. Leo didn't cry. He just stood there, staring at the wreckage of his efforts, while his grandmother turned away and went back to eating, as if she had just brushed away an insect. A powerful story like this crosses any border. I'm curious to know where you are watching us from. Leave a comment here, and if you believe that every story deserves an ending, subscribe to the channel. Because what this boy did 12 years after that day will remain etched in your memory. The trip back home was made in a silence that weighed more than any scream. Julia, Leo's mother, drove with her knuckles white on the steering wheel, the image of the shattered chapel made of sticks repeating itself in her mind. Leo, in his car seat, looked out the window, completely absorbed in the movement of the trees, as if he had already been transported to another universe, a place where chapels did not break. It was only when they got home and Leo ran to his room, to his safe world of Legos and books, that the dam inside Julia broke. She collapsed into her husband Marcos's arms, crying convulsively, filled with rage and a pain that seemed ancient. She destroyed him, Marcos. In front of everyone, she took his heart, which he offered with so much effort, and crushed it on the floor. She sobbed, her face buried in his chest. But it's not just that. It's not just about today. It's about every time she sighs, when he makes a repetitive noise. It's about his birthday that she forgot last year. It's about how she looks at him, as if he were a miscalculation, a stain on the family name. She pulled away, pacing the room like a caged animal. She didn't just reject Leo's gift, she rejected me. She rejected the mother I've become. To her, our son's autism isn't a condition. It's my failure. Proof that I didn't know how to set boundaries, that I didn't know how to fix him. Every time she despises him, she's screaming that I failed. And the part that kills me the most, she said, her voice falling to a whisper of confession, is that sometimes for a second, I almost believe her. I feel so tired of fighting, of explaining, of defending. And today, when I saw that broken gift, I felt like giving up everything. Marcos held her tight. "You haven't failed, Julia. You are his greatest advocate. The failure isn't yours. It's hers. It's her inability to love her own grandson unconditionally." But his words, though true, barely scratched the surface of that deep wound. It was the wound of matriarchal rejection, a hole left by the person who should have been the family's safe haven, but who was instead the source of the storm. That Sunday lunch was just the cruelest chapter in a long saga of false hopes. From the moment Leo was diagnosed at age 4, Julia clung to the naive belief that her mother, Marta, would eventually understand, that a grandmother's love would overcome prejudice. That hope was nurtured and killed over and over again. At first, Julia tried the educational approach. She printed articles, bought books on the autism spectrum, and accidentally left them at her mother's house. The books were never opened. The articles were used as coasters for coffee cups. Marta's response was always the same, a condescending smile and a cutting remark. "Julia, please stop looking for diseases. The boy just needs a little more discipline. In my day, there was no such thing." Each word was a small blow to Julia's hopes. Then came the proof phase. Julia made sure to tell Marta about every little achievement Leo made in therapy. "Mom, today Leo was able to point to what he wanted instead of screaming." Or, "He stayed at the school party for 20 minutes without having a meltdown." She expected a spark of pride. "That's great, my daughter." Instead, she received a vague, "Oh, that's nice." followed by a quick change of subject to the impeccable grades of some distant cousin or the professional success of the neighbor's son. It was a subtle and devastating way of saying, "That's not enough. He's still not normal." The most painful false hope came when Julia's father, a quiet man dominated by his wife, fell ill. For months, Julia went out of her way to take care of her father and the house, hoping that her dedication would soften Marta's heart, that seeing her daughter's sacrifice, she would finally see the value of that family. For a while, it seemed to work. Marta was kinder, more dependent, but as soon as her husband recovered, the wall of ice rose again, perhaps even higher, as if she resented that brief vulnerability. Building the stick chapel was Julia's last big gamble. She encouraged Leo, helped him find the materials, believing that such a pure, symbolic gesture, coming directly from her grandson's heart, would be the key that would finally open her grandmother's heart. The destruction of the chapel was not just the destruction of a gift. It was the final demolition of any hope Julia still harbored. She understood with terrible clarity that she was offering her love to a door locked from the inside. Marta was not a fairy tale villain. Her cruelty did not come out of nowhere. It was forged in fear. Fear of what the neighbors would think, of what her relatives would whisper. She grew up in a time and community where appearances were everything. The success of her children, the perfection of her home, the harmony of her family, everything was a show for the public. Leo, with his brutal honesty, his inability to fake smiles or follow social scripts, was a flaw in that show. He was the truth on a stage of lies, and that terrified her. At the heart of her story, there was also an unresolved loss. Marta had a younger brother, born with what was then called problems, a child who was hidden from society and died young. She never spoke about it, but the shadow of that brother lived on in her. In Leo, she did not see her grandson. She saw the reflection of that old shame, that primal fear of being associated with what was different, with what was broken. Her rejection of Leo was a twisted defense mechanism to protect herself from the trauma of her own past. It was a desperate and cruel attempt to cut off a part of her life that she couldn't bear to face. The grandfather, for his part, practiced the sin of omission. He loved Leo in his own quiet way. He bought him expensive Legos and patted him on the head when he thought Marta wasn't looking, but he never confronted her. Years of a marriage where her voice was the only law had turned him into a passive figure. His silence at Sunday lunch was not one of agreement, but of learned cowardice. He chose the peace of his marriage over the dignity of his grandson, and that choice, though not as loud as Marta's scream, was just as devastating. The conflict, therefore, was not simple. It was a complex web of fear, shame, repressed love, and cowardice, where everyone was, in their own way, a prisoner of their own stories. The only truly free person in that room was Leo, and that was exactly why he became the target. The turning point was not a confrontation, but a decision made in the quiet of the early morning, days after the incident. Julia and Marcos were sitting in the kitchen, the house silent. "I can't do this anymore," Julia said, her voice firm, without tears. "I can't take our son to be hurt anymore. I can't ask for love from someone who doesn't have it to give." Marcos took her hand. "Then let's not go anymore," he replied. "We are the family, the three of us." At that moment, they made a silent pact. The energy they had spent trying to manage his grandmother, trying to educate her, trying to please her, would be entirely reinvested in a single project: building a world for Leo. A world where his quirks would not be tolerated, but celebrated. The first action was radical. They stopped going to Sunday lunches. They stopped calling. When Marta called to complain, Julia responded with a calmness that surprised her. "Mom, we love you, but our priority right now is our son's peace. When you really want to be part of his life, come find us." The calls gradually stopped. The second step was to seek help, but not to fix Leo. They found a psychologist, an older man named Dr. Arthur, who saw autism not as a disease, but as a different operating system. It was he who looked at the wreckage of the stick chapel that Julia had kept in a box and said, "This is not a hobby, it's a language. He thinks in 3 dimensions. He sees structure where we see chaos." That sentence changed everything. They stopped trying to push Leo into group activities and immersed themselves in his world. Marco set up a workshop in the garage with carpentry and model-making tools. Julia enrolled him in a technical drawing course. They discovered that Leo's passion for structures ran deep. He didn't just want to build. He wanted to understand how things were made, from antique clocks to cable-stayed bridges. The quiet turning point was this shift in focus. They stopped looking outward, seeking an acceptance that would never come, and began digging inward, discovering the treasures hidden in their son's private universe. They amputated a family member to save the whole body, and in the vastness of that newly created space, Leo began to build his own empire. The next 12 years were not a straight line of success, but a collection of significant victories built brick by brick. The garage workshop became Leo's sanctuary. At 12, he built a perfectly functional model of a pocket watch mechanism using only wood and recycled metal. At 15, he won his first prize at a state science fair with a detailed project on the engineering of Gothic cathedrals. The victory wasn't the trophy, but the moment he had to present his project to the judges. He didn't look anyone in the eye, but spoke for 10 uninterrupted minutes about ogival arches and buttresses with a passion and knowledge that left everyone speechless. Julia cried in the audience, tears of pure pride. He found mentors. Dr. Arthur introduced him to an old retired watchmaker who taught Leo the secrets of micromechanics. An art teacher encouraged him to enroll in a summer course in industrial design at a university. There, Leo discovered 3D modeling software, and his universe exploded. The language he spoke with his hands could now be translated into the digital world with infinite precision. The biggest victory was social, and it happened on his terms. He didn't become prom king, but he found his tribe, a small group of engineering and design nerds who didn't care if he didn't understand sarcasm or if he needed to wear headphones in the cafeteria. They cared that he could solve design problems that seemed impossible. At 18, he was accepted into one of the best architecture and design colleges in the country. It wasn't because of quotas or his history. It was because of his portfolio, a collection of projects so intricate, original, and ingenious that the admissions committee was stunned. Every model he built, every award he won, every unlikely friendship was a silent response to that Sunday lunch. It was proof that when you plant a seed in the right soil, it doesn't just grow. It blossoms in ways no one could have predicted. Julia stood at the door of Leo's studio. He was 20 now, a tall, thin young man, hunched over a giant computer screen. On the screen, a glass and steel building twisted toward the sky, a structure that seemed to defy gravity. Around the room, shelves displayed the fruits of the last 12 years, complex models, prototype gears, trophies. It was a map of her son's journey. She thought of her mother, Marta. After her father's death a few years earlier, loneliness had consumed her. She lived alone in the big house, surrounded by immaculate furniture and an overwhelming silence. Attempts at reconciliation were rare and awkward, always beginning with veiled criticism, an inability to acknowledge the past. And Julia, with a calmness she had not possessed before, kept her distance. A wave of emotion washed over her, but it wasn't sadness. It was clarity. She realized that the most painful decision of her life, to distance herself from her own mother, had also been the right one. What would have become of Leo if she had continued to drag him to that house, forcing him to seek the approval of someone incapable of giving it? He would have become an insecure man, perhaps broken, always feeling that there was something wrong with him. By protecting him from Marta's rejection, she didn't put him in a bubble. She gave him a greenhouse, a controlled environment where he could grow strong enough to one day face the world. Her grief for her mother was real. She missed the mother who existed in her childhood memories, before fear and bitterness took over. But that grief was overshadowed by immense pride, a sense of accomplishment that filled her completely. She didn't heal her son. She set him free. She freed him from the expectation of being someone else. And in doing so, she also freed herself. She was no longer the daughter seeking approval. She was the mother of an extraordinary man, and that was a much more powerful identity. Destiny, she reflected, was not a straight line. It was a garden, and she had pulled out the weeds so that the rarest flower could bloom. Destiny, as always, has a sense of poetic irony. At 75, Marta suffered a stroke that left her with impaired mobility and speech. The big house was sold, and she went to live in a high-end nursing home. the same one she had always pointed to as the tragic fate of elderly people abandoned by their children. She was surrounded by material comfort and a deep existential loneliness. It was around this time that a national newspaper published a full-page article. The headline read, "The Silent Genius. Meet Leo Novaes, the young designer who is revolutionizing sustainable architecture." The article told his story, described his precocious talent, and highlighted his final project, a community center for people with neurodiversities, a building designed to minimize sensory stress with adjustable lighting, controlled acoustics, and silence rooms. The design was revolutionary. Julia read the article with her heart in her mouth. After a week of hesitation, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went to visit her mother and took the newspaper with her. Marta was sitting in an armchair, staring out the window. Her eyes, once so hard, now seemed lost. Julia opened the newspaper to the article and placed it on her mother's lap. Marta looked at the photo of Leo, a serious, handsome young man, standing next to his award-winning model. With difficulty, she read the first few lines, and then something happened that would mark Julia forever. Marta began to cry. It wasn't a cry of pride. It was a dry, choked cry of pure and absolute regret, a cry for what she had lost. Julia just watched. The following week, Julia's phone rang. It was the nurse from the clinic. "Your mother is asking to speak to Leo. She keeps repeating his name." Julia spoke to Leo, now a man in his 20s. She explained the situation. Leo's response was calm, without anger, almost analytical. "I have nothing to say to her, Mom, and I don't need to hear anything." That was the true and final revenge. Not a confrontation, not words of hatred, just the peaceful indifference of someone who had built his own world, a world so rich and complete that there was no room left for those who had once rejected him. What he did 12 years later was simply to become himself, with such brilliance and strength that his grandmother's shadow became insignificant. Her fate was the loneliness she had sown herself. His fate was the universe he built with the pieces of the chapel she had broken. Sometimes the most powerful response to those who try to break you is not to shout back. It is to use the pieces to build an empire and then live in peace within it. Destiny is not what happens to us. It is what we build with the pieces that are left. If this story made you reflect on family, forgiveness, and the power of overcoming adversity, like it, comment with your opinion, and subscribe to the channel. Your presence here helps us tell more stories that need to be heard. Someone, somewhere, may be needing to pick up their own pieces today.